Hey YouTubers, this is Jacques. Today I'm going to be talking to you a bit about the GFX50R right here. I got it from Fuji and I got it with the 63mm f2.8. I want to talk about who the hell this thing is for. So before I start this review, I just want to tell you one thing that I will not be covering, and that is a video performance. So we're going to talk about photo quality and why you'd want to buy this camera in the first place. So first, let me go coldly through the specs of this camera. The Fujifilm GFX50R is a medium format sensor camera with a 51.4 megapixel sensor. It has a native ISO of 100 to 12,800 and weighs in at about roughly 690 grams. Medium format has this little oomph that you can't get with other sensors. It's like a 3D feel to it. And that's an argument that cannot be ignored because I believe it's very important to get something that makes your image pop out and make it different. The only way I can explain it for myself is that I find my images communicate a bit more emotion when I'm using a medium format camera. There's something that pops it out just a bit more than full frame or APS-C. I just wanted to mention that. Let's continue with the video. It is weather resistant and has the X Processor Pro chip. It also has a 2.36 million dot touchscreen LCD back panel and a 3.69 million dot EVF with 100% coverage. It works with the G mount and therefore uses the excellent GF line of lenses by Fujinon. The effective pixel area of the sensor measures 36 millimeters by 24 millimeters. Although it is not a real medium format in the total sense of the word, it offers a larger pixel area and therefore higher physical dynamic range, low light tolerance, and color depth than a standard full frame sensor. For those wishing to take advantage of Fuji's beautiful film simulations, you will not be disappointed. All simulations are there. The camera has a mechanical focal plane shutter that goes to 1/4000th of a second. If you want to go into an electronic shutter, you can go all the way to 1/16,000th of a second. It has 425 focus points that can be put into a single, zone, and wide tracking mode. It also has face and eye detection modes, which I found particularly useful in a studio shooting environment. Auto exposure and flash modes are relatively standard. The ergonomics of this camera is great. Although many have spoken of the fact that it feels clunky in the hand, I am not getting that at all. It is strikingly a lot thinner than its S counterpart. All buttons are close and button placement feels intuitive. The only one complaint that I have coming from the XT3 body is that I wish they had made an analog button integration a bit more complete, meaning I would have loved to have seen the ISO dial on the outside of the body. Button feel and construction are second to none. And although this is a bit of a dumb remark, the shutter release sound and feel is sublime. Anyone old school will love it. The GFX series cameras are without a doubt a niche camera. It really is a camera that holds its own in many ways in the sense that it is one of the few cameras that offers a huge medium format sensor with the practicality and relatively small size of a mirrorless camera. Being that it does that, it suffers from having a couple of substantial onlys that need to be addressed. Some of the onlys can be ignored because of what the format has to offer, and some cannot, and render this camera less attractive for any buyer out there. This camera only shoots at a burst rate of 3 frames per second. To me, this is not a big thing because of where medium format shines, i.e. landscape, studio, still life, fine art. You are not looking to pop off a whole lot of shots. It's just not the case.
Although it can be argued that in many of the workflows one might use this camera for, where we mostly focus manually, I think that Fuji really could have tried to up the ante on the autofocus and move towards phase detect. Indeed, portrait photography is where the camera could have really shined. Manual focus can be used, but with a larger sensor. Depth of field is even shallower and focus can be missed very easily, manually or automatically. In places where I would have needed a good continuous autofocus like street and portrait, I found this camera lacking quite substantially. I believe that Fuji's idea was to compensate for that lack of technology by giving more focus points. Although it might have helped, it just adds more, less accurate focus points. The GFX50R also only has a flash shutter speed sync of 1/125th of a second. This is one of the biggest disappointments of this camera and of the GFX50S. To me, to sell a medium format camera with such a slow flash shutter speed sync is to actually shoot oneself in the foot. As ingenious as it was for Fuji to put a flash shutter sync of 1/250th of a second on the X-T2 and X-T3, I find it so foolish to be putting a flash shutter speed of 1/125th on a camera that you want to sell for people doing boutique studio shoots.
Guys, I really want to talk quickly about the larger sensor size and how I think that it's not that important anymore. Now, this is a weird one, and a lot of people might disagree with me on this point, but I think when you're going to go out and buy a camera with, check this out, guys, a sensor this big, you're going to have a lot of people out there who are going to tell you that the larger sensor, you're able to get high megapixel count, better color depth, and higher dynamic range because the size of each pixel is larger. And I cannot argue that point. I cannot. However, today, some of the full frame sensor options that are out are starting to offer high megapixel count. Now, the argument to go out and buy the medium format is that each pixel size is larger, therefore you get more low light tolerance. But those type of things don't matter as much when you're in a studio environment where you have argued that this camera will be useful. In a studio environment, your flash is perfect, you have a light meter, you're making sure that all elements of light, exposure are perfect and they are completely controlled. Therefore, that argument of having the larger sensor, physically larger sensor, isn't there. So you lose that argument as well. So you're going to see, I believe you're going to see a lot of people using the A7R4 in a studio environment where they need to do print because they don't need those larger megapixels. They have a smaller camera, they can work with it better, and there's a whole slew of other autofocus options that you get on those cameras that you will never get on a GFX50R. Everything involving the GFX50 line is kind of weird. It's kind of weird because you're telling people we're offering a camera with an extremely large megapixel count, with extremely large sensor size, meaning each pixel size is actually larger, therefore more color depth, more dynamic range, and just better image rendering performance. That's what you're telling people. However, every point where you can actually take advantage of that has narrowed down because of the offerings of other companies like Sony, Nikon, Panasonic. Therefore, the argument to actually buy this camera is more based on a lot of the philosophies we had in the past. So the person who wants to get this camera has loved medium format photos all their life, wants that little oomph, wants an artistic look to their shot, wants to be able to get great performance at high megapixel counts in low light. Therefore, I believe there is a huge market for the fine art photography artist. I think this is probably a great camera because you can push this thing in any sort of environment and do all kinds of crazy, crazy things with it. Use it in natural light, use it in low light, use it in the dark, and you'll be definitely getting the ultimate performance that you can get out of a high megapixel camera. You're going to get it out of this camera. So fine art. I believe the person who's retired and seen medium format photos all their life and is interested in getting that little oomph. So the person who is retired, a great serious hobbyist, would love this camera. But I just don't see it in the studio. I see it doing well in a studio environment, but I see that there's other less expensive offerings out there that are great. Listen, I want to tell you guys that I do like this camera a lot. I think it is a great camera. But I think when we speak in terms of just marketing and where Fuji is going with the market, the sales, in the end, will make Fuji possibly rethink whether they should put as much energy into this line of camera and lenses. And it's a market reality thing. There's a lot of full frame offerings around from other companies that compare, and not only compare, but surpass in terms of features and price. My personal suggestion to Fuji would be develop a full frame. Develop a full frame that has some of the monster features that you have on your XT line, the XT3 and the XT30. Those things are monsters. And I can just imagine and dream a day that I would have those monster features on a full frame made by Fuji. That is possibly my dream, because as much as medium format gives you oomph, I believe that full frame also gives you oomph over APS-C.
Hey YouTubers, listen, I decided to do just a live edit so you guys can see what is going on with this GFX50R and why I do believe it's still a contender as a studio camera. Now, unlike the GFX50S, which has a lot more studio functions to it, or the GFX100, it still is a contender, I think. And one of the big reasons is that I really think that when I used it for tethering, I used it tether with Capture One, I really did like the placement of where the USB cables were and the power cables on the bottom of the camera. Now, some people have mentioned, some reviewers have said that it's counterintuitive. I just want to tell you guys that it is really, really great. Now, I just wanted to go here and maybe do a bit of a live edit just because I have a couple of dark pictures where my flash wasn't strong enough. By the way, this is Mireille. I will be coming out with a behind the scenes with her, but I wanted to take this image right here, which is relatively flat. There's some highlights and shadows, but you can generally see that it is a bit too dark. So I just want to show you who shot this, the metadata on this shot. So it was shot with the GFX50R f26 at 1/125th of a second. Obviously, the problem with this shot is the fact that it's shot at f26, because my flash doesn't change. Normally it's f14, f11, but and let's just see the camera to make sure. Yeah, there it is, digital camera, GFX50R. And you can see by the dimensions, 6,192 by 8,256, that it is a large file. We are in the 50 megapixel range, everybody. So the first thing we want to do is open this up and maybe show a bit of the dynamic range you get with a larger sensor. Now, this is in general with the GFX50R or the S. I'm not saying that you're going to get better on the R or the S, but with this sensor that's on this camera, this is the type of dynamic range you are going to get. I'll just pull that in right here. If I pull up exposure just now and do that, you can see that the image is not losing any of the quality that it had initially. Let's just play with some highlights here. I'm going to pull up the highlights and pull down the shadows, pull up the highlights, give myself some general contrast, move exposure up to burn that up. As you can see, you can play with the dynamic range quite a bit within a shot. done with the GFX50R. Now, a lot has to do with the fact that it is medium format and less the fact that it is the sensor on the GFX50R or the processor from the Fuji GFX50R. It's just that with this sensor type, you will be able to get a lot of dynamic range. Now, they boast a lot of stops of dynamic range, but you know, I just wanted to say that it's there. And when you do buy a camera like this, it is one of the advantages of buying a medium format.
Please comment below, tell me what you think. Like, share, subscribe. I hope you enjoyed this video. And please do not forget, keep on making something from nothing.